You know what you just did? You have any idea what you just did? You see, just a few minutes ago, you made a proclamation. You sung it, actually. You said, and then one day, I'll cross that river. I'll fight life's final war with pain. And then as death turns into victory, I'll see the light of glory, and I'll know he reigns. Because he lives, you said, I said, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know who holds the future. And life is worth the living. You just said you're going to live because he lives. That's a hard song to sing, I'm telling you. When we think about what we commit to, when we think about what we're saying, we're here tonight. You're here on a Sunday evening at 5:23 because you believe that he lives. And he does. And it's a glorious thing. If you were to take some time and look back and say, over the last 3 or 4 years in our society, in our nation, what would be some of the main topics of conversation? I mean, from a social standpoint, from a political standpoint, what are some of the main things that have been talked about over the last 3 or 4 years? And if you didn't come to the one that I'm going to suggest to you pretty quickly, then you just haven't been paying attention. You see, the idea of immigration and all that entails, and the sheer number of people who have come to the United States in the past 3 to 4 years, is staggering. And it has just completely dominated the world talking about it. As a matter of fact, early this week, before what's going on over in the Middle East started, it was the primary topic of what was happening. And the reactions of people, the riots and things of that nature, to the actions of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Group. Now, I'm not here tonight to talk to you about the right or wrong nature of the things that they're doing. That's not our place. We don't come together as God's people to discuss political things and social things. That's left for another time and a totally another place. We are a spiritual kingdom, and we're here to talk about spiritual things. But I only bring it up to you because you are then familiar with the idea of foreigners. You are familiar with the idea of being a stranger in someone else's land. You are familiar with the idea of being a pilgrim, as it were. When I mention the word pilgrim to you, what do you think about? What comes to mind? Well, I'm going to guess that the vast majority of you are like me, and what comes to mind is Thanksgiving, right? And what comes to mind to you is the Mayflower, and what comes to mind is the men and women who were in black outfits and white outfits, and their interaction with the Native Americans when they came over, and the celebration of what we call Thanksgiving. That's what's in your mind. The idea of, or the word associated with pilgrim, according to Thayer, means one who comes from a foreign country into a city or land to reside there by the natives. Hence, he is a stranger. He is a sojourner in a strange place. He is a foreigner. Now, we can all understand that, but just glancing around the room here very quickly, I'm going to say that most of us are really not familiar with it personally. We don't really know what it means like to be a foreigner or stranger, to go and to reside somewhere on a permanent basis in a foreign land. As a matter of fact, I looked it up. And the United States Census Bureau, said that 60% of the people in the United States, 60% now, that's 6 out of 10 for those of you who are working on your math this evening, right? Or 60 out of 100, or 60, I'm not going to keep going. But you get the point. A lot of people, they live within 10 miles of where they grew up. Did you ever think about that? If I were to poll the group here and find out how many of you live within 10 miles of where you grew up, well, we may not be 60%, but it's going to be a percentage of us, pretty good percent. 80% of the people in the United States live within 100 miles of where they grew up. Now, I'm going to get a lot more of you then. A lot more of you then. So what we're saying is that most people in the United States are not really familiar with going and living in a foreign land. I am. I've lived in Tennessee now for a while. It's foreign. I mean, you people are weird. That's all it is to it. You're not weird. But most people don't go away from where they grew up. And yet I'm here to tell you this evening, folks, that as a Christian, if you're not familiar with the idea of living as a pilgrim, if you're not comfortable with the idea of living as a pilgrim in this world, something's wrong. Something is wrong. Because we are strangers. We are pilgrims. We are people who are living in a world that is temporary, and we have our vision pointed towards somewhere else. Turn in your Bibles with me. We're going to read this evening. We're going to read from Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to read beginning down in verse 8, and you know what this chapter is, you know what it's all about. It's about reminding the people here that the Hebrew writer is talking to, of people who had faith. Faith that moved them to act. This faith that caused them to be pleasing in the sight of God. Chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went in to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them, and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. I want to talk to you tonight about a perfect example for us from the Old Testament about learning to live as strangers in this world. You're very familiar with the two people that we just read about, Abraham and Sarah. We've been talking about the book of Genesis in Sunday morning in our Bible class here in the auditorium. Brother Alan leading us in that, and we've done a complete study on these people. And we realize that when God first called them from the Ur of Chaldees, he called them and they left their home to go live as pilgrims for the rest of their lives. We may not think about it, but that's exactly what they did. I want you to notice some of the words that were used there in those verses. And he went out not knowing where he was going. That's a pilgrim. By faith he sojourned in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles. Are you getting the point? They are seeking a country of their own, but now they aspire to a better country. That is a heavenly one. All of these help us to understand that this life that they chose was a life of where they don't belong. They continued to live in a land that they didn't belong. What would cause them to live that way? What would give them that determination to live the rest of their lives in a land where they didn't grow up, with people around them that they didn't grow up with? I want to suggest to you a few things. Number one, they chose to live as pilgrims first because they understood what God promised them. They knew exactly what God had promised them. You can say, well, what did God promise them? Well, according to Stephen, before they ever left their homeland in Mesopotamia, God came to them and he told Abram, leave your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you. If you put that together with the rest of the account in the book of Genesis, I think what we see is that God actually comes to Abram twice and tells him to get up and go. First, he tells him to get up and go from his homeland, and he says, I'm going to show you where you're going to go. And he starts going. And you remember he goes to Haran, H-A-R-A-N. And there they dwell for a little while, him and his wife and Lot and his father. But there in Genesis chapter 12, after his father passes, God comes back to him again. And in Genesis chapter 12, he tells him again, I want you to go. And it's at this time that he gives him two promises. Did you hear what I said? He gives him two promises. He says, and I will make you a great nation. And he says, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. He gives him the nation promise. He gives him the seed promise. But he hasn't really given him the land promise yet. He just says, I want you to go. And I'll show you where. Abram goes. And when he gets down to the land of Canaan, God gives him this third promise. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 7. To your seed I will give this land. And so now he shows him the three promises. Land, nation, seed. How much did Abraham, or Abram at that time, understand with regard to these promises? How much do you think he knew about it? How many questions do you think that he had? I'm going to venture to think that he had a lot of questions. I would even venture to say that he probably asked some. Doesn't mean God answered them, but he probably asked some of them. As a matter of fact, it goes on to tell us in Genesis chapter 15 that he does ask God some questions later on. Because at that time, God appears to him again and is confirming the promises, and Abram says, but I don't have a seed. I don't have any children. Right now, everything I have is going to go to my servant. It's not that he was questioning that God wasn't going to accomplish it. He didn't know how. He didn't know how. But there's one other thing associated with these promises that I shouldn't put you in mind, that I don't always think about, that the Hebrew writer brings out to us. Notice what he says. It's very important to us. He says that Abraham and Sarah, when given the promises, understood that their real inheritance, the one that they were truly looking for, was not one on this earth. Notice that he says, it was an inheritance of a heavenly nature, for he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. That's what he was looking for. A heavenly dwelling. He was looking for a permanent place. He left a permanent dwelling, most likely in Ur. Most likely it was a more permanent dwelling place that they had there. To go live in tents, which are temporary dwelling places, while he was looking for something that was truly permanent, the city whose architect and builder is God. He understood what the real promise was. It wasn't for him. He understood later on, God goes into a little bit more detail, telling him that he's not going to actually receive the physical promise of the land. As a matter of fact, he says, it's going to be some 400 years. Right? We talked about that. It's going to be some 400 years before your generations after you, your descendants, receive this land, because the the Amorites' sin had not yet completed for him. And so Abraham knew that that really wasn't his inheritance. What was going to be really his inheritance was this heavenly kingdom, this heavenly home, this heavenly land. What caused Abraham and Sarah to continue to live as strangers in a foreign land? Well, number one, they understood what the real promise was. Number two, they had confidence that God would fulfill his promise. Why would you get up and leave your homeland and go somewhere if you didn't even know where you were going? Well, you're going to have a lot of trust in the person that told you to get up and go. I gave this example yesterday. I actually talked some about this yesterday in the class over at the Cade Center. And I gave this example. I said, if my wife came to me and said, Ben, I need you to get up and come with me right now. First thing I'm going to do is say, what's wrong? Second thing I'm going to say is, where are we going? And I might even go, why? And if she said, I just need you to come, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get up and go. Why would I do that? Well, I love her, and I trust her. She's not going to tell me with an urgency of get up and come, I need you to come, without having a reason. She's not going to do that. If one of you calls me on the phone, any one of you, I'm not going to pick one of you, any one of you calls me on the phone and says, Ben, I need you over here right now. I trust you. You need me. I'm going to hang up the phone and call. Because I trust you. They trusted God. Abram trusted God. And so therefore he got up and left, not knowing where he was going. But he got up and left. Brother David McClister, in his commentary on Hebrews, said this: however, since they were people of genuine faith, they were able to see that fulfillment. They were convinced of the reality of what God had told them, and they believed that God would keep his promise. They believed in him. Now, they still did so. And because they believed in him and they obeyed him, they were accounted as righteous. But they believed. Even when they were barren at an old age, past the point of being able to have children, still believed. Didn't know how, but still believed. Even when he was told to go and to offer up his son, his only son Isaac, it says there in Hebrews later on, right after those verses that we read, right around verse 17, that he knew that God would fulfill his promise even if he had to resurrect. Isn't that interesting? Abraham thinking about a resurrection. That he would resurrect his son from the dead if he offered him up as a sacrifice. Why? Because he believed God. And that God would fulfill his promise. They had confidence in God. So therefore, they did not return to the land of Ur, but rather they kept living as pilgrims. They also were content with God's promises. They were content with his promises. You know, just this past Wednesday night in our class, we were talking about 1 Timothy chapter 6. Brother Glenn was leading us in that study. And in that particular passage, it talks about godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, and so we cannot take anything out of it either. And if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. Brother Glenn asked a very straightforward, simple question. He said, what is contentment? And at first you might say, well, that's an easy one. Contentment is, and then you sit there and think about it, well, yeah, what is contentment? Well, it's got the idea of satisfaction with it. It's also got into an idea of joy, finding joy in there. It's being able to look at the situation that we're in and not reach out farther than we're supposed to. That's what I came up with after I thought about it for a while. Contentment is being able to look at the situation that we're in and not reach out farther than we ought to. You see, God tells us not to be content with our current knowledge where we are right now. He tells us to grow. Right? He tells us to increase in our love. So we shouldn't be content with where we are in loving one another. But at the same time, he tells us to be content. So you have to understand where you are and not reaching out further than you're supposed to. Again, consider, all these died in faith without receiving the promises. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, none of them received the actual physical inheritance of the land. None of them saw the seed, the Messiah come. None of them, none of them became a nation. And yet, through the eyes of faith, they could see it. Through the eyes of faith, they could see it. They patiently kept the life of a pilgrim because they were contented with God's promises. They were content that God had made the promise. They didn't put their own happiness ahead of it. You know, I could see somebody saying, you know, Abraham looking at it after God had told us it's going to be some 400 years. Well, if it's going to be that long and I'm not going to get to inherit this land, why don't you let me just go back to my homeland? Let me go back to where my family is so that I can enjoy them. And just let me go back because that's what will make me happy. How many of us on this earth talk about our happiness? And yet Abraham and Sarah didn't do that. They had opportunity to return. They did not return because they were content with the promise of God. And they maintained their pilgrimage because they concentrated on God. They concentrated on Him. You know, just as Moses, it talks about Moses here just a few verses after this. Just as he looked steadfastly to the reward, instead of enjoying the pleasures of sin for a season, instead of enjoying the pleasures that would come with being the son of Pharaoh's daughter, he suffered with those Israelites, the people of God. Why? Because he looked to, he concentrated on, he kept his gaze toward the reward. That's exactly what Abraham and Sarah did too. They didn't become distracted by the pleasures of this world. They didn't let their own appetites that their wealth could bring distract them, but they kept concentrating on the reward. They kept their gaze on the eternal and on the eternal one. So, now in just a few minutes, I want us to take what we've learned here and apply it to me and you. Because I've already told you that as Christians, we should consider ourselves as someone who doesn't belong here. Our citizenship, Philippians 3 verse 20, is where? It's in heaven. So we're strangers here. We're living in a foreign land. We're pilgrims. How is it that you and I can consider ourselves as pilgrims here? How is it that we can continue to live as pilgrims here? You see, living as pilgrims means that other people are going to consider us outcast. They're going to consider us weird. So how can we live that way? Well, number one, let's understand the promises of God. Let's understand the promises of God. You see, like Abraham, we have been given various promises, some associated with living here. We talked about some of these last week. God gave us some promises associated with living here on this world, living here in this earth. He told us in Matthew chapter 6, verses 24 through 33, He's going to provide us with material things, food, clothing, shelter. He's promised us certain things. He's promised us certain spiritual protection, 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. So we need to remember those things, but that's not our focus. Our focus is on the eternal. You see, over in Revelation 14 and verse 13, John writes, "And I heard a voice from heaven saying, Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, so that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow with them." If you didn't read Chris's post about resting from your labors, on band earlier this week. You need to go back and read it. Or, if you'd rather do it, I put it in the bulletin to make it easy for you. As Christians, we need to be working. We're looking forward to a rest. God promised us that. We're looking forward to the home with God where there is no more death, no crying, no temptations. Won't that be great? Do you get tired of fighting against temptation? Completely honest, folks, I get tired sometimes. I do. In heaven, you won't fight it. Because there'll be nothing to fight. It won't be there. But as long as we keep our focus on what we're reaching for, as long as we understand what God has really promised us, we can continue to live as pilgrims here. We can have the strength to do so. If we not only understand the promise, but we have confidence in the God who told us these things. Do you trust God? Why would you trust God? Well, first and foremost, you would trust God because of who He is. Over in the book of Hebrews, chapter 6, verses 9 through 20, it talks about God making these promises. And do you remember what it said about God swearing by making an oath? He said because He couldn't do it by any other, He swore by Himself. And you know what that did? That made it absolutely sure. Because of who He is, and He cannot lie. We can trust God that He will fulfill His promise because He is God. Number two, we can trust God because look at the actions of Jesus Christ. Look at what He did. Over in the book of Hebrews again, Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 14. It says, since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. By the way, we've confessed to be pilgrims and strangers on this earth. That's what we are confessing. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We can have confidence. Why? Because of the one who died for us. Because of what He's done for us. We can have confidence because we can look to the faith of others. In this same context in chapter 12, after he's gone through all this listing of different people who had faith and who lived their lives faithfully, and they were pleasing unto God, he now comes to chapter 12 and he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. I love that concept. It's the concept of a stadium. And it's filled with people. And they're watching you. And they're cheering you on. And they're rooting for you. And you're up there and you're doing your best to battle. And all the while you can know that those people who are cheering you on are not only rooting for you, they're telling you it's possible because they say, we've been there. We've done it. You can do it. God is with you. Keep going. We should have confidence that God will fulfill His promise. Because of who He is, because of the actions of Jesus, because of the faith of others, and really, one more thing for you to think about, because we know what our lives are. When we know that we're living the way that God wants us to, we can have confidence that God will fulfill His promise. He's going to do His part. There's no doubt about that. But we have more confidence when we're doing our part. We can continue to live as strangers, as foreigners, as pilgrims, because we're content with God's promises. Contentment with the promises of God requires at least a couple of things. Number one, it's going to require that you understand the value of what God has promised you. If you underestimate the value of what He's given you, you're not going to be content with it. But do you realize that He's giving you something that's eternal? You see, all the treasures of this life, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, well, they're going to rot. They're going to be destroyed in the end. But the treasure that he's talking about won't. For our momentary light affliction is working out for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Don't undervalue what God's promised. Be content with what he's promised. And you can be content with what he's promised if you have patience. Now see, this is where it gets tough, doesn't it? Having that patience. But didn't Abraham and Sarah have patience? I mean, they left, Abraham died, 175? He left Haran at 75. That's 100 years. That's a lot of patience, folks. That's a lot of patience. We want everything, and we want it right now. In our lives, we're used to getting that. Right? I dare say not a person in here, if he was craving a hamburger and a cheeseburger, would be able to go right now and go get you a cheeseburger. Because we're used to, oh, man, I really want it. I want it right now. And we go get it. But the promises that he's made to us, we've got to be patient. We've got to endure. Be content with the promises of God. And then finally, we can be pilgrims if we concentrate on God. That same passage, Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. You want to make it to the end? You want to treat your life as a pilgrimage, live as strangers and exiles, as we read in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 12 that Eli read for us? Do you want to live your life that way? If you want to be a Christian, you have to. Because that's what we are. How do we do it? Learn from Abraham and Sarah. Know exactly what God has promised. What has he promised us? Have confidence that God is going to provide those things. He will do what he has said. Be content with it. Because it's very valuable. It's the most valuable thing that we have. And then keep your concentration on God. Thank you for your time and your attention this evening. I appreciate it so very much. I hope that some of this will help you throughout your week this week in encouraging you to be a pilgrim in this world. If you're here this evening, you never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, now is a perfect time and opportunity. All things are ready. God has prepared all things for us. And we have to respond. It's God's mercy, it's God's kindness, it's God's grace that saves us. It's Jesus Christ and his blood that redeems us. But he requires us to come to him to receive that grace. It's still a grace. It's still a gift. We have to come to him. Maybe you've done that and you haven't been living the life of a pilgrim that you should, and you need the help of the brethren here. We'd love to help you. Won't you come while we stand and while we sing?